What's your favorite paradox? I don't know if you can call it a paradox. It's labeled as Ronald Opus on Wikipedia. On March 23, 1994, a medical examiner viewed the body of Ronald Opus and concluded that he died from a gunshot wound to the head caused by a shotgun. Investigation to that point had revealed that the decedent had jumped from the top of a 10-story building with the intent to commit suicide. He left a note indicating his despondency. As he passed the 9th floor on the way down, his life was interrupted by a shotgun blast through a window, killing him instantly. Neither the shooter nor the decedent was aware that a safety net had been erected at the 8th floor level to protect some window washers, and that the decedent would most likely not have been able to complete his intent to commit suicide because of this. Ordinarily, a person who starts into motion the events with a suicide intent ultimately commits suicide even though the mechanism might be not what they intended. That he was shot on the way to certain death 9 stories below probably would not change his mode of death from suicide to homicide, but the fact that his suicide intent would not have been achieved under any circumstance caused the medical examiner to feel that he had homicide on his hands. Further investigation led to the discovery that the room on the 9th floor from whence the shotgun blast emanated was occupied by an elderly man and his wife. He was threatening her with the shotgun because of an interspousal spat and became so upset that he could not hold the shotgun straight. Therefore, when he pulled the trigger, he completely missed his wife, and the pellets went through the window, striking the decedent. When one intends to kill subject A but kills subject B in the attempt, one is guilty of the murder of subject B. The old man was confronted with this conclusion, but both he and his wife were adamant in stating that neither knew that the shotgun was loaded. It was the long-time habit of the old man to threaten his wife with an unloaded shotgun. He had no intent to murder her, therefore, the killing of the decedent appeared then to be an accident. That is, the gun had been accidentally loaded. But further investigation turned up a witness that their son was seen loading the shotgun approximately 6 weeks prior to the fatal accident. That investigation showed that the mother, the old lady, had cut off her son's financial support, and her son, knowing the propensity of his father to use the shotgun threateningly, loaded the gun with the expectation that the father would shoot his mother. The case now becomes one of murder on the part of the son for the death of Ronald Opus. Now comes the exquisite twist. Further investigation revealed that the son, Ronald Opus himself, had become increasingly despondent over the failure of his attempt to get his mother murdered. This led him to jump off the 10-story building on March 23, only to be killed by a shotgun blast through a 9th-story window. The medical examiner closed the case as a suicide. What's a fact that just blows your mind? The 52 factorial story, 52 factorial being the number of possible combinations of a deck of cards. If you haven't read this before here, it still hurts my brain every time I read it. This number is beyond astronomically large. I say beyond astronomically large because most numbers that we already consider to be astronomically large are mere infinitesimal fractions of this number. So, just how large is it? Let's try to wrap our puny human brains around the magnitude of this number with a fun little theoretical exercise. Start a timer that will count down the number of seconds from 52 to 0. We're going to see how much fun we can have before the timer counts down all the way. Start by picking your favorite spot on the equator. You're going to walk around the world along the equator, but take a very leisurely pace of 1 step every billion years. The equatorial circumference of the Earth is 40,075,017 meters. Make sure to pack a deck of playing cards, so you can get in a few trillion hands of solitaire between steps. After you complete your round-the-world trip, remove 1 drop of water from the Pacific Ocean. Now do the same thing again. Walk around the world at 1 billion years per step, removing 1 drop of water from the Pacific Ocean each time you circle the globe. The Pacific Ocean contains 707.6 million cubic kilometers of water. Continue until the ocean is empty. When it is, take 1 sheet of paper and place it flat on the ground. Now, fill the ocean back up and start the entire process all over again, adding a sheet of paper to the stack each time you've emptied the ocean. Do this until the stack of paper reaches from the Earth to the Sun. Take a glance at the timer, you will see that the 3 leftmost digits haven't even changed. You still have 8.063 more seconds to go. 1 astronomical unit, the distance from the Earth to the Sun, is defined as 149,597,870.691 kilometers. So, take the stack of papers down and do it all over again. 1,000 times more. Unfortunately, that still won't do it. There are still more than 5.385 seconds remaining. You're just about a third of the way done. To pass the remaining time, start shuffling your deck of cards. Every billion years deal yourself a 5-card poker hand. Each time you get a royal flush, buy yourself a lottery ticket. A royal flush occurs in 1 out of every 649,740 hands. If that ticket wins the jackpot, throw a grain of sand into the Grand Canyon. Keep going, and when you've filled up the canyon with sand, remove 1 ounce of rock from Mount Everest. Now empty the canyon and start all over again. When you've leveled Mount Everest, look at the timer, you still have 5.364 seconds remaining. Mount Everest weighs about 357 trillion pounds. You barely made a dent. If you were to repeat this 255 times, you would still be looking at 3.024 seconds. The timer would finally reach 0 sometime during your 256th attempt. To not flunk out of college, I changed my grades and thousands of others as well. When I was a student at a major university in the late 80s, I was failing several classes miserably. I had completely screwed up in 2 of my 6 classes and I needed to make a plan of how not to flunk out. For one class, I decided to dedicate all my spare time in correcting where I went wrong and fix it by acing the final exam. The other class, which was much more technical, required that I come up with a plan. Keep in mind that I was a total goody two-shoes kid who felt like they were in a desperate situation. Failing out of college was not something I could allow to happen. Desperate times, desperate measures. The class that I needed to pass was a science/engineering class that I had not bothered to go to, so I went to the very last Thursday class to figure out my plan. One thing the professor did say was that if you had a 93 or higher average in the class you could opt out of the final exam that was happening in 1 week. I had a 64 average, so I had to take the exam. How was I going to ace this exam? My grades were too low to get pulled up enough. The only way to fix this was to get my grades changed. So I came up with a Hail Mary plan. One that involved a few rules to be broken. And by rules, I mean laws. The science building where the class was given would close for the weekend. This meant that the professor's offices were locked and most of the labs were locked as well. You could still get into the main parts of the building, but you had to talk to a security person if it was after hours. There wasn't digital badges and shit like that back then. So here was my plan. On Friday afternoon after most classes were over, I scoped out the whole building. It was a U-shaped building that was 3 stories tall. I had to find a way in. Luckily, I found one of the first floor labs on the inside of the U had large horizontal windows that could be unlocked and would allow for someone to crawl through. Even better, one of the lab's windows were obscured by a small fenced-in area that housed some of the electrical and HVAC units. Large bushes lined the fence as well. So while I was there I went into the lab and unlocked a window to allow myself a place to enter the building. The door of the lab was propped open and I unpropped it and let it close. It locked. Good to know. It also reduced the chances of someone relocking the window. I also scoped out the professor's office. It was open but he was not there. It was very small with no windows. Just enough room for a desk, his chair and a couple of other chairs. His office door was an all-metal door painted beige except for a small center window in the middle. The window had a wire screen built into the glass held in place by a simple screwed-on frame. There were lots of manila envelopes and schedules etc. on the door as well. This would be a challenge but I had formed my plan. At around 3:30 in the morning I arrived back at the building with my backpack and a plan to break into the building. I had a hammer, pliers, a roll of tape and some screwdrivers that I had scrounged and I was nervous as hell. I made way through the bushes and climbed over the fence. I checked the window and it was still unlocked. I pulled myself up through the window and into the dark lab. Remembering that the lab doors would lock behind you, I slowly opened the lab door and placed some tape on the lock to stop it from locking. I was expecting a quiet building but instead was greeted by the loud sound of machinery running. Another lab was conducting an all-night test or something and at least 3 upper-level students were there overseeing the project. In a way that was good because my presence wouldn't necessarily be noticeable by others. I would find out later that it would also cover any noises I made. I made my way to the professor's office door which was in a more out-of-the-way part of the building. The office was located right by one of the stairwells so I could hear anyone coming down the stairs and also, if someone happened to start coming from the other way I could use the stairs for a quick exit. I pulled out the screwdriver to start unscrewing the frame around the glass window in his door and soon realized that the screws were covered in decades of paint. Not good. What I thought was going to be a 2-minute job turned into a 45-minute job. I went into what I would call flock it mode and just went to town on this window frame. I had a few starts and stops but no one came by. I got the frame off and tried to pry the glass out of the frame. It was sealed in with paint. Getting the glass out took a monumental amount of slow prying and steady effort. After 30 minutes of scraping and gentle pressure I had the glass pane out. I slowly reached in and turned the lock to unlock the door. I grabbed a large manila folder on the outside of door and repositioned it over the window, a perfect cover for the now mauled up window. I slid into the office and looked for something to cover the window that would block light. The desk calendar worked well and a few pieces of tape held it up well. Then I turned the lights on to survey the scene. I was now presented with a desk, a chair and small slim table behind the desk. Of all the ways my plan could go wrong, my biggest fear was that the professor may have taken all of his grades home with him. A quick look into the large flat file on his desk and I had his full handwritten grade register in my hands and the pen he used for recording grades was tucked right inside. He taught 6 classes that semester and I only needed to change 1 grade, my grade. However, now that I had seen how banged up the paint was on the glass window frame, I knew I had to alter the plan. I searched through the gradebook and found all of my grades and saw I had several in the 70s and some lower 60s grades. I had done some work in the class. I thought it over for a few seconds and started executing plan B. I went through every single class he had and began randomly changing anything in the 60s to read as in the 80s. Then I went through and changed all the 70s I found to read as 90s. I realized that the changed grades wouldn't stand up under close scrutiny, so I had to create a herd immunity of changed grades. I noticed a few bad students in some of his classes and made some extra efforts at changing their grades. A 0, now an 88. This was taking a while. With 6 classes and 50 students or so in each class, and about 10 grades per student, there was about 3,000 grades in this register. I changed at least 1,500 of those grades. Of course my grades were changed as well. Lots of numbers in the 90s. I closed the grade book and placed it back in the drawer exactly as I had found it, but I hear a little plink sound. I pulled on the drawer and realized it was now locked but wasn't before. Okay, so maybe he'll think he locked it. No big deal. My mind began to wonder of what the aftermath of this might be. Would this work? Would I be able to get away with not taking the exam by creating this academic chaos? About this time was when I noticed the IBM PC on his back table. Did he record his grades on a handwritten register in his PC? If he had a backup of the grades, all of this would be for nothing. Also, I couldn't reference all the changed grades. The drawer was now locked. I booted up his IBM PC XT and saw that it had two 3.5 disk drives. There's 5 disks by the computer. What to do? I load each disk in the drive and typed L. And nuke them all. I hadn't planned on this, but then flock it mode. So let's review the plan. Change so many grades that he would have to take an impossible amount of time to deconstruct the chaos and simply give out good grades, or at least better grades as needed. No one particular student would be identifiable as a culprit because there were plenty who had a motivation to change the grades. This was as good of an idea as I could come up with. After having distributed all the good grades to all the good boys and girls, I gathered my tools and planned my exit strategy. The back of his door had a few items taped to it as well, so I replaced the glass and frame and covered it with another manila folder. I wrote a poorly written note on a post-it that said, "Sorry, mop handle cracked the glass. Replace glass. Maintenance." I then split, got past the grad student running the machine, slipped out the window and never went back. Didn't show up for the final exam either because higher than A, edited, 90-93 average and all. Waited 45 long days that summer to get my grades. Got a 90 in the class. Yeah. Okay, no complaints. There had to be some other people who got their grades and were happier as well. Never suffered any consequences on this either, but it was the most stressful night of my life. I haven't done shit like this ever again.